So again, there's no one here, but now there is. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to our friend Steve. Steve, come on stage.
So if you ever wonder what it's like at any backstage, that's exactly what it's like. They're just standing there waiting.
Waiting. Hurry up and wait. Okay,
It's
cool.
this weird illusion of, we're hiding before shows when people do that. It's very
I'm glad we could provide an authentic experience right out of the gate so far.
Get a little extra.
Yeah. So Steve and I met at Dragon Con a couple of years ago, and I just want a quick little follow-up. How are things going with your Kubota tractor and land management life? Is that still a thing?
It's always a pain in the neck, and I'm still doing it. It's funny when I have land that I look after, like in my personal life, and so I have this giant tractor and like a farm tractor, and anyway, this is boring. Who cares?
It's exciting. Come on.
But the point is, you buy these really nice pieces of equipment, and then you realize that you could have bought a cheap, lousy piece of equipment and replaced it every year for what it costs to maintain the nice ones.
Yeah.
This
is why I'm never going to be a homeowner. Kudos to you.
Sorry, I had to get that off my chest. It's springtime. This is when all this happens. So we're just kidding.
I had a feeling it was fresh. I was like, let me just throw this weird ball. Like, it makes no sense to anyone here. But one thing I know, thank you, the pandemic, of course, binging. You're a avid TV watcher as well. What have you been binging, and how much of it has apparently been Ozark?
Okay, I have to say, I love Ozark a lot, and I have not watched any of the new parts yet, and I don't quite know why. It's like, I know I'm going to love it, and I'm like depriving myself for a while,
Kind of holding off.
There's so many good dramas. I mean, I am a Netflix person. I see a lot of Netflix. So that's a lot of what I'm watching.
What's some of the things that you've been diving into? Because
let me tell you how this is.
Yeah.
I never remember the titles of shows because so many of the Netflix shows are one season, so you're just getting into it and you end it. And then I think, okay, it was great. What was it called? I don't know.
It had that guy in it. There was a monster maybe, or maybe it was a really nice outfit.
They all have two-word names.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of stacks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know what I'm watching.
Yeah, we just kind of make it up as we go along with watching things like that. Well, like when it comes to like television and binging, obviously, pandemic has let us go, let's do lots of binging. But where have your other fandoms existed? Obviously, we're here to talk with Steve. He's known for puppeteering. But like, what are the other fandoms and things? You kind of got in an early age of puppetry, but I want to know just where your other nerdy aspects are.
Yeah, well, I was... my high school thing was going back and forth between puppets and music. I was, my hair was even longer then, and I was long-haired rock and roll guy in the 70s.
Wow.
But still, actually, it's funny about that. I think back about that, and puppetry, you guys may or may not have you may not have any idea who I am at all, because a lot of people don't, because what we do is we're down below the camera. You don't see the puppeteers. And in a way, it's the same. It's really the same when you're on stage as a musician. And I was a terrible musician. That was a long time ago. But you're almost hiding behind a kind of a persona you're putting on the stage, like Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
That's not who he is in real
No,
life.
that's his front. That's the persona and things like that.
So I was always generally more comfortable, whatever it was, in a backstage way than on stage. It's different talking to you guys, but mostly I don't care to be seen. I never wanted to be an actor. A face actor, as some people call them.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
A normal actor, an ordinary actor.
Just someone who just kind of blends in front of everyone, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Acting is definitely a transition to, I do like community theater and puppeteering as well. So there's definitely like that statement of a normal actor. It's kind of like a badge of honor. Like, that's right, I do Shakespeare or whatever. And then also, like, but I also play with the hand and rod puppets, too, and that's a lot of fun.
I don't know, we may have talked about that before. I don't recall whether we did or not.
I don't know if we did, because we did an interview with Dragon Con. I do. I normally have a puppet with me on stage. A question poll, So he's a very Fraggle-esque, without legally calling him a Fraggle. Things like that. So it's a lot of fun.
Those Fraggles will sue you in a moment.
Oh, they're rough.
Oh, yeah. You think they're nice.
Yeah, until they just dive in. So, well, in that time, a conversation we had, especially with puppetry here in Atlanta, being a big puppet town, we were trying to figure out what makes Atlanta a puppet town. Is that something that you've really been able to figure out? It's kind of this great mystery. Yeah.
The only reason I think that, for a certain group of people, that's the case. Obviously, the Center for Puppetry Arts is here.
It's literally like right around the corner. So.
Yeah, and it just so happens that, that particular place, that institute, is probably the largest thing of its type, maybe in the world. I mean, it's probably the biggest, most comprehensive puppetry center that's devoted strictly to puppetry that there is. There are others, and I think maybe that has something to do with it. There's an association of that, because you can go visit there as a person, you know, you just walk in. And they do some really interesting things there. If you haven't seen it, I don't know, if you're local Atlanta, you might have it. If you're not, try to find time to see it while you're here.
Is anyone here local? Like how many local people?
Atlanta people?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm
We're both
from Atlanta as well,
Yeah.
so that's
So it's definitely like if you have never been, and like you don't have to be a big puppet nerds like
Right,
us,
right.
but you're here, you must be some degree of puppet nerd. There's definitely like a lot of great storytelling stuff
Yes,
that's not
yes.
just Henson specifically.
Right.
There's a whole World of Puppetry wing, and they do shows and things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. And there is the Jim Henson Museum now, which is a permanent thing there, so you can see, you know, a lot of Jim's history in there. It's cool to walk through that as somebody who was there for some of that. You know, I look on the walls and, well, for instance, I don't know whether any of you know who Dave Goles is. He's one of our main puppeteers, does
No.
Gonzo, so many other characters. When Dave came to town some years ago and I took him to the center, and he actually walked through, and there's an area that's meant to be like a bulletin board that would have maybe been in Jim's office. And there was a note on there and a sketch that Dave had done. He didn't know it was there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was actually his thing that
Yeah.
they found in the archive someplace and stuck on the
Look
board.
at this, looks good here.
Yeah, you know, he didn't know it was his. So there you go.
Surprise
It is
there.
authentic.
Yeah. There's a lot of fun things they pulled from there too. So, and like we mentioned as well, like your local boy. I live in Lilburn, and that's kind of where you're from too.
Yeah.
There was a show here that filmed season 1 elsewhere, but came here for season 2, Lego Masters. And then you had some fun puppeteering in that. That was as a person who loved that show. Suddenly, you're now appearing in this other show. I'm like, well. There's that guy I know. What was that experience like? Like, it was surprising to see the move here for a lot of reasons, and
Yeah.
like, how did that facilitate the conversation?
Well, Lego Masters happened because the executive producer of that particular season is an old friend, Anthony Dominici, and he was the executive producer of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, if you guys remember that show with Ty Pennington and that whole crew. And we did that show a bunch of times with the Muppets and a few times with just Kermit. And so we knew each other. So suddenly he's shooting in Atlanta. He knew I lived here, and he said, "Oh, we want to put a puppet on. I know how to call this guy."
I know this guy.
Yeah, so I said, really, you know, it's great when you don't have to audition for something.
Oh my gosh. Living the dream there at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what was it like working on that set? Because, you know, like with puppeteering throughout your career, there is no one defined
Right.
puppet set. There's no
Right.
setup. You always
Right.
have to fit where you can.
That's exactly right.
And like that was not a set that was designed for puppetry. Like, how much input did you have in cultivating, or rather like lining up the shots and things like
Well,
that?
they were happy to collaborate on that because I sort of knew how that worked. And I tried to make it as simple for them as I could.
Right.
Because I knew it was going to be one of the situations where I'm going to be sitting on the floor and they're going to have tables and I'm going to be down like this. And, you know, it's always hard to do work that way.
Yeah.
And so they were just terrific. I mean, there's a lot of handheld cameras, which can be tricky with puppets if the camera operators haven't really worked with puppeteers before because they're always shooting too low, or they're shooting your head, they're shooting down on top of you too
Oh,
much.
it's a
to
sweet
get down
spot.
at a certain point.
Yeah.
So, but it was great. I mean, they were all terrific. A lot of local Georgia kind of talent because there's so much going on in the film industry here in terms of the crew. And Will Arnett is terrific, if you guys know who Will is. It's fantastic. Such a nice guy. And we just, almost everything we did on that show was just playing.
Yeah.
We had a general idea of what was supposed to happen, and we just improvised and
Yeah,
played.
but it's scripted to a point where, you know, like any other
You have a
reality
point
show.
to get across.
To a point to get
Right,
across, you have to
right.
sell the story of that episode.
Yeah.
But that seemed like so much improv, just in general, because, you know, they
Yeah.
shoot for 8 hours and they cut,
Yeah.
but like, you're having to be there, making
Exactly.
it up the entire time.
And the only downside of that is this terrible position. When you're sitting flat with your arm in the air, it's a killer. And we would do 20 to 25-minute stretches that they would cut down into 5 minutes. But I kind of needed to stay alive the whole time.
Yeah.
So that's a killer.
Oh, God, no, yeah.
I'm not as young as I used to be.
No, I feel that even then, like, has anyone here actually done puppetry before, out of curiosity? Hold your hand up. So now
Hold your
hold it
hand
way for
way
half
up.
an hour,
No, yeah.
and that's what, you know, you
So some
never
of you have.
realize. Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it-
Like, if you don't know, it is like a
Yeah.
huge, it's a stamina, you know, kind of push.
It is, and plus, you know, the work we did with the Muppets, we were always looking down at monitors as we work. So we're sitting with camera Cs, which means that you're really working, standing like this. So you got your head way down and your arm way up. And it hurts. I mean, it can start to really hurt. It's not about the weight of the puppet.
No.
It's about, I mean, you could sit there with nothing on your hand for an extended period. It's about keeping it steady, about not starting to waver and drop, and, you know, it's keeping absolute steady, but flexible at the same time.
Yeah.
You know?
Authentic.
It's all right in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. This part's loose and floppy, that part's solid, you know, when you're doing it.
I don't know if I told you this story. There's the other show, Dragon Con, that I do as well, and we had a morning show that I helped kind of create. And one year I was like, you know what, I'm going to bring my puppet on. I think maybe Leslie happened to be there that year. I was just like, all right, there's some puppet guests. Let me do some fun things for puppeteering. And we were like, what if one of the hosts for this 45-minute first show of the day, we called it a late show, was the puppet? And so I was sat like underneath the table, you know, with a monitor and all these things. But like there I am with that puppet for like a 45-minute stretch, for, like first thing in the morning. And I was just like, yeah, I've always done like 5-10 minute stretches, walk around the convention and stuff like that, but that was the first time I'd done the marathon like that.
When we used to do things like this, we would do press conferences for films and stuff. And you got the whole press corps out there and 100 cameras, video cameras, and so the character really has to stay alive all the time, because in a situation like that,
never know.
We don't have monitors. You know, we would do a show like Hollywood Squares years ago. You know, one of the characters in one of those squares. Kermit would be there. And you know when they call your name, he's going to have to perform. But what you don't know is that at any moment, the director might cut to you for a reaction. Yeah. They used to do that all the time. And you don't want to get caught with your arm, you know, Kermit's like this. It's like you've had a couple of beers over lunch.
Did Kermit have a rough lunch here? What's going on here, guys?
Exactly.
Having that situational awareness of like keeping life in the puppet and still maintaining your own physicality is such a delicate dance.
Yeah, it's super important to me. You know, I was saying to somebody who came by the table earlier that we always, at least I always viewed the Muppets as really individuals unto themselves, you know. Obviously, we're puppeteering it, we know that, and we don't talk to the puppets. But they are, it's as though they are entities in the world, you know, just like the rest of us. And so they're very individual. And when they're in front of people, they need to stay alive. You know, and it can be really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. There's a question I had saved for later, but like, since we're kind of in this moment, what is something, I don't see how I worded it correctly, like, basically, like, what is, I apologize, everyone.
That's okay.
Basically, going through and like, what is a,
here we
go. What are some methods and techniques?
All those pages are blank.
Oh, absolutely. Saying. You can't read this. No, it's fine. Because I had to word it very, like, what are some methods, techniques of puppetry that you feel are essential, specifically in a way that an audience might not even be aware that the puppeteer is doing them?
Yeah. It's a tough question to answer. It becomes an atmosphere that you're in. You know, you are suddenly, as a puppeteer, you are almost no longer thinking about, it's like riding a bicycle. You're not thinking about pedaling and balancing. I got to this weird point in the later years, particularly with Kermit, because I was doing so much of Kermit all the time, that when I would look at the monitor and I'm in the middle of a, you know, like on the Today Show, and it's all ad-lib and we're playing, it would slip out of my mind that I was doing it. And in a funny sort of way, I was watching this thing that was entirely separate from me. And in a really weird way, it was as though I was waiting to see what he was going to say next. You know,
caught in the moment. You're like, what's going to do?
Yeah.
Oh, it's me.
I can think of so many times when my brain helped me somehow to get through those things, because I would just start talking with no idea what was going to come out, and then something would form itself, like in a dream, you know, metaphorically, things would happen, you know. It's great when you get to a point with a character where you can do that with a puppet character, because you're responsible for the movement and all of the life and everything that's going on at that moment. And it's a hard place to get to sometimes.
It is, especially with some of these puppets. Like, for example, like one of my questions for you would be like, what is the most difficult puppet you've ever had to manage, and is it VP Richfield? You know, because of the size and the weight and the design of those style of puppets.
Fortunately, Richfield on Dinosaurs was this giant thing, but he was supported from above. So I didn't have to take the weight.
Oh, goodness.
The hardest part I mean, I was inside of this shell that was this wide, and he was so wide that, well, I had to use both hands for the mouth like this.
Oh, I did not know that.
But it had to be really fast, so it was like crazy.
He was a jabberjaw,
Yeah. The dialogue went very quickly, and I had to have two other separate people, one in the right arm and one in the left arm, because no one could reach it.
Yeah.
It was too big. So 3 people had to be extremely kind of coordinated together. And I love when that happens, by the way. And it doesn't always happen. If you're working with another performer and they're doing a hand for you or something like that, you know. And when you get to that stage where you can just, you know, I don't get into telling people what to do very much when it comes to that. I like for them to feel what they need to feel in order to do it. And you just find that balance. People find the balance of what works for their portion of the puppet, you know.
It's some of those cases, the phrase, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing,
Right.
which is kind of like
Yes.
the gimmick with some of these things, but like you really have to have that intimacy, that comfort.
Yeah.
So there's like an intrinsic sense of, okay, I trust them to be embodied in this same headspace as the rest of us.
Normally for me, I would find that if I didn't notice what the other person was doing, it was exactly right.
Yeah.
If I'm in the middle of doing what I'm doing and I'm being drawn attention to what they're doing with like another hand or something, I think, they're doing a little too much.
Right.
You know, it's not
They can dial
natural.
it in, but yeah, it's your own.
It's the lead thing, and you can't lead that way. You know?
No, that's good. That's a really fun way because when you're in that pod, you have to, like, you're leading because, you know, you're the voice, the face, but you still have to remember, like, it's not a leader in the sense that you're kind of like letting go a bit, you know?
Well, yeah, and that's not always the case. Some people are saying, okay, when I say this, you do this. And I never wanted, first I never wanted to think about it because I had things to think about on my own. But I also wanted to give people the opportunity to just learn. You know, I think that's important.
Live in the moment, as it were, and things like that. One of the things that you've been working on the last couple of years, actually, you just started premiering it like right before the Fire Nation attacked, as it were, was Cave-In with Weldon, which has been a fascinating experience. We've got some fans here, and how that's the one. What was that?
Yeah, he was one of my callers.
Nice.
It started out as a thing I wanted to do that wouldn't cost me any money. It was an easy thing because I had no budget. You know, I didn't want to put a lot of funds into it. And I wanted to do a character that made sense for the internet. And so I thought, well, you know, let's do a troll. Let's do an internet troll. But it turns out that he's also a troll by species. He's this little furry thing with big teeth and horns, and he's always in a bad mood. You know, that was the first part. I started out having him, he would take calls from the viewers, which is what we still do. We're doing one tonight, by the way. If you're not busy tonight, go to YouTube, go to the YouTube channel, and you can find Cave-In, and it's live. And you can even call in if you want to figure that out. Okay.
You have your fan.
But it's okay. But anyhow,
That's good.
so he turned into this character. Originally, I was trying to gauge what the character was going to be. He was a little bit insulting to some of the callers, like a Don Rickles kind of thing, if you guys know who Don Rickles was. Not really unkind, but that was supposed to be character. And I realized real quickly that once in a while people would call and I would say something and they didn't know how to respond to it. And I thought, okay, this doesn't work.
Because you want a dialogue.
So what he started doing was, what he wants to know from his callers is what's the most miserable thing in their life, because he's a miserable guy.
Right.
And so instead of attacking them in any way whatsoever, I have him agree with them. And whatever they're upset about, he gets upset about it too. You know, and it's a great jumping off point to be silly. You know, so anyway.
And you focus a lot too, like, you know, on what's miserable. You know, like what's miserable, like what are you feeling bad about and things like that, and being able to have fun, but like healthy conversations surrounding that.
Well, it's interesting about that because in the early COVID time when everybody really was locked down, nobody can go anywhere, the streets around Atlanta were empty. I was still able to sneak over to this little tiny place where we shoot this. And the first show we did after, you know, nobody knew what it was like the apocalypse, and people called in and they really wanted somebody to talk to. And we did an extra long, like almost 2-hour show that was like this giant group therapy session. You know, it was really touching to do it. And they were able to talk to this character and just talk about how scared they were, you know, and it was a real different tone to the show. So the next episode, we had Weldon have his cave full of all the things he was hoarding, like toilet paper. So it's all behind him, and he lives in a cave. And so he said, I don't even use toilet paper. I'm just going to, you know, this is just so I can sell it when there's a shortage, you know. So it just, you know, material grows out of material. And the other thing we do, which is fun, if you don't want to sit and watch any of these shows, go to the YouTube channel and check out the playlist that are the production numbers. In each of the shows, I've put in about a 2 to 5 minute, like a Muppet-style production number in a way. And it's everything from musical numbers to parodies on things. We're doing one tonight that's a takeoff on Top Gun. because the new movie's coming out. Yeah, so, yeah, exactly, the new Top Gun is
Just came out. Mhm.
So we're calling it Tom Gun. Anyway, it's just
That's
silly
awesome. Well, it's important with comedy and stuff to be at the forefront of like
Yeah.
pop culture because comedy
Trying
is
to be.
like sometimes doesn't age well, but that's because we're always with comedy and a lot of ways being here and now and present.
Yeah.
And that's something like especially with the pandemic that's
Yes.
ongoing and stuff like that, having that connection to be in the moment and things
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
what I like. And my favorite thing ever with the Muppets was always to do the appearances where we had no script,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, the talk shows, like The Tonight Show or something like that. We really didn't have a script, and whatever we said is what we said. It's
Yeah.
all ad-libbing and playing. But prior to that, I did a little local show here in Atlanta, just out of high school, that's really a lot like Cave-In is now. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of back to doing what I love doing, which was taking phone calls. Back then it was an actual telephone. Now it's, on the internet. But I love that, and I love playing with the people on the calls, Sometimes you get somebody who doesn't know what they're going to say, and Weldon's like, are you going to say something?
Yeah.
But anyway, check it out. See if you like
Yeah.
it.
And it's interesting, like we brought up the work with Don Kennedy too, because like with the Sid and Marty Croft
Yep.
world that was originally here in Atlanta leading that. It's
Right across the street.
It's literally like at the
Yeah.
Omni and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's interesting to see like how you've kind of come back full circle in a way
Yeah.
to this call in nature, and because again, like that's one thing that's never changed in our human nature is connection. Even though the biggest introverts of us all, even though I'm on stage,
Right.
like we still want to find ways to
Yeah.
reach out and connect with people, which has been it's hard.
That's true, and I find it, throughout the years, as, quote, interactive started being the thing, back when interactive wasn't really interactive, when you had like a disc you put in your computer and you interacted, but, it was all pre-programmed stuff. I always used to tell people, the most interactive thing is just conversation with somebody, so if there's a way to do that live with people, it's the best. It's so much
Yeah.
fun. Even if you have a little tiny audience, it's still
Oh,
fun.
it's intimate.
I
Like,
love it.
you have a quote, like, there's nothing more interactive, like you said, face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
And that's something conventions really kind of gives you as a performer the opportunity. In a community theater kid, you might be able to
Right.
go and meet people after a show, but like when you're doing years of Muppets and all of your other work, you're not getting that immediate, oh, hey,
Yeah.
these conventions have been hopefully good for you in that regard
Yeah.
and connecting with the fans.
Well, that's always fun.
Yeah.
It's always great, It's terrific. We get really uber fans who really know the Muppets and everything
Yeah.
we've ever done. Probably know things that I don't even remember.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I love that. And it's so great to meet those people this has been such a big part of their lives. But really, an awful lot of people have been touched by it in some way.
Yeah.
So many people say, oh, The Muppet Christmas Carol is my Christmas movie. I run it every year.
Mm-hmm.
And I do too, and it's one of my favorites of all the Muppet films.
I don't like it. Y'all have a good day. No.
I hate that movie. I hate that.
That's actually a fun point because this is a great opportunity for me personally, and bringing up Muppet Christmas Carol is a fun note because of the time that you started to do Kermit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you feel that maybe Muppets from Space is often overshadowed by Christmas Carol or Treasure Island, especially because it was the first real original, it was totally Muppet. It wasn't an adaptation of something. It got to be
Right.
especially that was one of your first full pieces with Kermit being Kermit, right?
It's purely Kermit, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, that's true. We had done Christmas Carol and Treasure Island and cast them in stories, and we could have kept doing that with classic stories forever.
absolutely, yeah.
But at a certain point, you say, no, we need to get back to the original characters. And I think most of the main performers, kind of core people, were really pushing for us to get back to a real Muppet story rather than to do another classic story.
Right.
And that one was fun. I mean, we had a good time with that. It was an odd experience because, for so many reasons.
Oh, so many.
It was just,
it was weird intrinsically.
it was almost like getting on our feet, after Jim passed away again, because it was moving into a different thing. We had this great story with those two other films. Suddenly we were starting, what's the Muppets and what is it, and how do we let them grow, but how do we keep them based on who they are? It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one thing, like, growing up, like, watching, especially Muppet from Space when it came out, it's like,
Yeah.
like, I was probably, like, the one person in my circle, it's like, I will defend this movie, because it's my kind of weird, I feel
Yeah,
related with
yeah.
it, because it was trying to strike that hard balance,
Yeah.
which was something, like, I'm friends with Kirk Thatcher, for
Oh,
example.
yeah.
And so we've talked about that as well, like, how Muppet Treasure Island, stuff like that. It's fun, stuff like
Sure.
that, but trying to get things
Yeah.
back to what things, because
Yeah.
he just did the Haunted Mansion, the Muppet Haunted Mansion piece
Right.
recently, and how that, how a lot of people kind of forget the roots. And
Yeah.
that's not true necessarily for Muppets, that's true in anything that has
Right.
longevity,
Yeah.
and things like that. With
It can
evolution.
be tough to keep. I call it Jim's influence, and it became very hard to keep that a part of what was going on.
Yeah.
At a certain point,
You
because
could
you're kind of past the point where anybody worked with him.
Yeah.
And if you walk into like a boardroom and say, well, we probably want to keep Jim's influence into this, you're the old person who
Yeah.
doesn't be progressive. And I always wanted to do it in a progressive way.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether this is probably something none of you will care about. But people talk about characters and everything when it evolves. And really what evolution is, it's not just something changes, it transcends what was there before, but it concludes all those things it was built upon. And that's what, from my point of view, began to kind of disappear a little bit with the Muppets.
Makes sense.
They were just striking out in new directions, and people were starting to write things and use them in ways that were, for me, having been there through this whole long growth process, felt like we just chopped that off and completely started over. So it was
Right.
a little bit weird.
Yeah, a little disjointed, dare I say.
And I think that's their connection to the audience. Is that history and what people know about them and staying true to that.
Yeah, and I know, like, and there was a time there, like, there was more Muppet presence on social media and stuff like that. But that's one thing
Yeah.
to kind of step away from the Muppets for a little bit here is, like, social media as a whole has really kind of given birth to, like, this new level of puppetry. Like, I'm on
Yeah.
TikTok, there's a whole
Yeah.
puppeteering
Oh, yeah.
community on TikTok and things like
Wow.
that, because the technology has changed
Yeah.
so much since you've started, and then, like, specifically in the last 10 years of puppetry.
Right.
What has been some of those kind of innovations where you've been like, oh my God, like, I'm excited for these next generations of puppetry?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, things that I would like to do more with a budget would be to do more integration of, computer animated things along with the puppetry, but not to replace the puppetry, just to enhance it. I think there are great ways to do that. Now, some people say, oh, but that, if you, for instance, let's say you never see the bottom half of the Muppets hardly, it's like the waist up all the time. It'd be interesting to do, legs are hard. You can get on a green screen and you can do that, but it always looks puppety to me.
It's hard to be natural.
And I think their legs could be CG and the top part could be the puppet. There's all sorts of ways to integrate that kind of stuff in.
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate, and everything we do on Caveman is done against green screen. Because first of all, there's no budget to go out into the world and shoot. Second of all, I found that unless you have a company like Disney behind you, a huge budget, it's very difficult to organize a shoot that makes it easy for puppeteers to go out into the world and do good work, because you're lying on the ground and you're trying to move, and it's a nightmare.
It is.
If a puppet is this big, the person underneath is already this big, and then if you're sitting flat, you've got your knees, and if you've got 3 people doing that and trying to get those puppets close to each other, it's really hard.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's
Yeah.
really hard. So I'm a real advocate of trying to make better use of, matting and green screen and keying and things like that. But it takes a lot of attention, and some of the Caveman stuff looked great. Some of it, it's cheesy. But it to shooting the background plates and things like that with your videos to make them really work with the characters.
Yeah.
And then deciding, well, which am I going to shoot first, the plate or the puppet?
Right.
But whenever you see Weldon walking, I'm walking in place and the background is moving, It's really funny because I get kidded by people who actually know what they're doing. You work with what you've got. If you have your computer and you work with what you've got. And I didn't want to go out and spend on thousands of dollars worth of expensive software. So any of you who have Mac computers, Apples, will know Pages, the word processor. Virtually every background, unless it's a photograph that you will see on Caveman, I generated in a word processor, in Pages.
Oh, wow.
And some of them look really good.
Yeah, they're polished.
It's amazing what you can do in a word processor with importing photos, making your own shapes.
Just line it up.
Yeah, it's really something. Talk about creative.
Yeah.
I mean, it can drive you crazy, but it's very cool.
I'm sure that like that must have been a fun outlet throughout this pandemic as well, because it's like, all right, you're still like, the timing of you creating
Yeah.
Cave-In was one of those things like, all right, it's like unfortunate that the pandemic is ongoing, but like,
Yeah.
you still had that outlet. You were able to take
Right.
these skills that anyone can take, and I think that's a great takeaway message for like what you're doing with Cave-In and things like that. You know, and things that we're seeing on TikTok is like,
Yeah.
It is a great time for anyone here who is interested in puppetry
Yeah.
to work with what they've
Try
got.
with it.
To work with what they've
you know,
got.
I always, something I learned way back, like in the 80s when we were doing Fraggle Rock,
Mm-hmm.
I went out and bought all this kind of, you know, at the time it was expensive recording equipment, you know, like big reel-to-reel
Oh, yeah.
tape decks and synthesizers, and I was doing musical stuff in my spare time. But what I realized really quickly is you can spend a lot of money on equipment, and it has nothing to do with whether what you do is really good or not, you know? And the approach this time was to just do it. Just get out there and do it. And maybe you're not good at it anyway, but you find
But you
out,
do it.
and you didn't spend the thousands of dollars, you know?
Yeah.
So you just get out and play. I knew I could do the puppetry, but look at one, if you go see this thing, there's one we did a couple of Christmases back that was kind of a parody of It's a Wonderful Life, called It's a Miserable Life, because it's this guy. It's black and white, and it's, you know, I don't know whether you guys know It's a Wonderful Life, but Jimmy Stewart, this guy's about to kill himself. He's going to jump off a bridge, you think. An angel saves him. So Weldon plays all the roles in all his videos. I do one character, I do the other character. So he's the angel, and he's also the guy, and it's the same set. So that whole set was done in Pages, in a word processor. So, and that one I'm particularly proud of. I think it looks great.
It was fun. It was very entertaining.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Well, it's been about half an hour, and he
Yeah.
and I can literally, as you can probably figure out, that we can do this all day because we're just going to talk shop and hope it's entertaining. But I want to make sure that you guys have an option to have your voices heard too. So do me a solid. I just want to get a quick estimate. Raise your hand if you have a question.
Oh, good.
Okay, so some good people. So Amanda, do you want to go around? Do you want to do a line? We're going to run around. Okay. So Amanda has walked away. So we'll start actually we'll work our way back to front here with this gentleman here with his hand up with the glasses, and then we'll start working our way down to everyone. So I'm trying to get as much time as we
Testing the
can.
mic to make sure it works.
So
Yay,
to your
we're set.
left over there.
There you are.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Just making it worse? All right.
Yes.
So I was wondering with something like the Dark Crystal with the Skeksis, which were very, very innovative puppets at the time they were made, how was it doing things like that where they were mobile, but there were also multiple puppeteers working on them at the same time? Because they're moving around
Yeah.
while there's people operating them at the same time.
Right. Yeah, in the super wide shots, you probably know, it was little people in costumes. Is it still politically correct to say little people? I hope so, because I got stuck in that in the 80s. Anyway, some of the most terrific suit actors were these guys, these people who were only this tall. And it was also good to have them, these characters had bicycle cables running out of them with all these controls. Back then, that's how you did this stuff. You wanted to eye blink, somebody blinked an eye, you know. And these guys, being smaller, were able to hover around the bottom of the character and stay out of the camera shots. Now, they're not the only people who did it. There were tall people who did it too. But we would have as many as 8 people circling around us while one of us was inside of these Skeksis. And it could get very hard if we had a lot of movement. But what we tried to do was pare down the number of movements we needed to see at any given point if the character had to walk from 2 different marks. And that was really the only way around it. You could only drag so many people along with you, you know, and get where you were going. But people got really good at squatting and being low and kind of shimmying along, you know.
Squat game was strong, as they say.
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You good?
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And there was a person right here in front of you, Amanda, as well?
Here.
Yeah, you got it. And I see some folks everywhere. Like I said, we'll take advantage of the momentum and we'll kind of keep Amanda from running around too much.
Good to see you again, Steve. I met you at Dragon Con during when you were promoting the Muppets. So
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, speaking of which, so you've spoken highly about all the movies and stuff. So, but as far as like the TV stuff, is there any particular project or special like on TV that you didn't think was just up to quality or just could have been done better, and why is it Muppets Tonight? I'm just kidding.
The things that I thought maybe weren't quite as good.
Yeah, like just there one
let
in
me
particular
think.
stands out?
I mean, we always had things go wrong, and sometimes we miss the mark on things. Honestly, I'm just being honest, don't hate me. Muppet Wizard of Oz is not my favorite film. It's fine. We did some great stuff in it. There's some great little numbers. It just seemed a little weird to me. But still, you know, I tended to have so much fun doing these things that it's hard for me to judge. I'm trying to think if there's anything I really didn't like. I don't think so. I think I've always been able to find something good about what we did. The last series, a lot of people had trouble with a lot of that. The ABC show we did, where it was more like The Office, because of the tone of it. And it was an interesting thing to try to do. I wasn't as crazy about that. I think our puppetry work in that was really good.
It was astounding.
Everything got much more subtle, which meant the Muppets weren't quite as whimsical as we might have liked them to be. But at the same time, it was a real challenge for us as performers to tone down the puppetry, which is what we did for Dark Crystal and things like that. We wanted to have these living, breathing kind of creatures. So we really brought a lot of that into a character like Kermit. And I had a lot of fun learning more and more, because at that point I've been doing Kermit for quite a long time, about the little subtleties I could get out of his facial expressions and the tiny little things that could convey something. He's the most simple puppet in the world. He's just a piece of fabric, really draped over your hand. But the tiniest move can indicate a whole emotional change in a very small way with a character like that. With other characters that, Miss Piggy's just a foam thing. You can move her, do things with her mouth and her nose, but it's mostly about the movement of her head, and little things about the head add a lot of that. But the tone of that show was a little bit odd for me. We were just getting to a point where it was starting to feel like the balance was happening when they canceled it.
Yeah.
So that's what happens.
The back half really brought it in, and then it was
Yeah,
gone.
yeah, it was just starting to get good.
Something that we had a Sonic quote here.
Yes. So obviously, I think you started doing Kermit when you did Muppet Christmas Carol after
Right.
Jim passed. Were you ever apprenticed by Jim Henson when doing Kermit?
No, I wasn't. I stood in for Kermit once over the years during the Muppet movie to do just some, like, the back of his head shots. You know, it was strictly like a moment. You know, there's a shot in Moving Right Along where Kermit and Fozzie are in the front seat of the car, and Jim was off shooting something else, so I'm doing Kermit. But it's literally just the back of his head. I mean, it's nothing. But no, not at all. You know, I was around Jim all the time when he was doing Kermit, and that was the only instruction I would have had with Kermit. But you know, it's funny about it was never about Kermit so much as it was about Jim, because Jim was so much a part of Kermit. When you were seeing Kermit, you were seeing an aspect of Jim in a very strong way. And that's why I talk about Jim's influence being a part of Kermit and the Muppets is very important. And, you know, it was also distinguishing between what I knew to be Jim Henson and then the things that he put into Kermit that were just, it was parts of Jim that he transferred into Kermit. So I would say Kermit was kind of the most idealistic part of Jim. But he had little mannerisms that he did and little ways that he spoke and pauses in his speech. And it really was vital that I had been around him for a dozen years. I just don't see how it would have been possible if I wasn't like this with him, you know, to see what he was doing. You know, it really was about keeping him alive as much as Kermit in a funny sort of way. Yeah.
You ready for that one?
I kind of have a couple of questions. One question, I was a puppeteer at Voyager Little Mermaid and Disney Junior, and at Disney Junior, the shows would be about 30 minutes, and I noticed when I did puppetry, like we would do warm-ups and we would lift weights to warm up those muscles.
Right.
But I noticed after doing a lot of puppetry, my muscle here would get really sore and
Yeah.
sometimes really tight.
Yeah.
Do you have any like arm stretches to be able?
Nope.
No, we would do stretches too.
You just suffer for the art.
Yeah, it's a killer.
Yeah.
You know,
That's where it always gets you.
I don't know what to suggest because I find that sometimes these days, because I do this thing I'm doing, but it's not the intent work that I was doing before. And I'll get incredible pain right here, you know, just from doing a lot of that in a hurry. You know, you just keep doing that all day, it's going to hurt. Here is a big one. It's a funny thing happened. We were doing Cave-In, and I've got, the way I'm set up on Cave-In, I'm running the puppet like this. If you imagine a box here, I'm doing this. That's pretty comfortable, because it's an hour of doing this. So doing this for an hour is crazy. So, and he's seated anyway. So and I'm out at the side of the camera. So it makes it, the camera's right here, and I'm just cut out of the side. But this still gets tired. And when I noticed that, I thought, well, I used to lift weights a little bit, so I started doing that again. And I found that it caused more problem than it actually helped in the end. I mean, I built up a little strength. Weird thing happened. This part of my arm started to get a little bit bigger, and I couldn't get it in the puppet. I made the puppet so tight. I had to split the puppet open. So I thought, well, this is kind of counterproductive. Where I was headed, you know? Yeah. I thought, well, I got this great arm now, but I can't get it in the puppet. You know?
Cool. I believe we had a question over here.
Where is it?
Put your hand up here.
There you are.
And then we'll come to you after that. And then there was some more over here I saw.
Salon paws.
It's back over that side.
Those
We're
patches.
gonna be coming back
They
and
help
forth.
a little bit.
Like, 2 items. Would you do a little Rizzo for us?
Sure, I could do Rizzo. Why not? How you doing? Don't forget to eat.
See, Rizzo
Now you tell
is,
me.
sorry, say part 2.
Oh, so part 2 was the end of Christmas Carol when the love is found. There's a lot of puppets together,
Yeah.
moving, the dinner table. Just talk about how that was done,
Yeah.
how you all were crammed together. Or
Well,
how-
yeah, and that set was scaled way down too. The Cratchit home was quite small. And it really was just a matter of loading, you know, I don't remember any puppeteers, but it was in excess of probably 50 people. Every puppeteer we could find in England, you know, who would come and do this. And get them all in there, get them all set. Someone had already, probably along with Brian Henson, had sorted out the positioning of the characters, the relative positioning. You started with the core characters and branched out from there and out the door. Not only was it crowded, but the camera had to move out. You know, so you had to have room for a camera crew to move in amongst these people. My recollection is that we got all the puppeteers in there after telling them all to shower and, you know, put on the deodorant. And, I mean, we were like,
You're in
you know,
there.
like this. I was in a great spot because since I was doing Kermit, I was under the table. So I had like a little house there. I could be inside and reach out. But it was extremely crowded. And I think maybe one of the biggest challenges from the puppetry point of view and from the workshop point of view, the folks who look after the puppets, was once everybody's in there, it's getting all the puppets onto those arms. Because there's no way people could have gotten in with the puppets on already. It was like, get everybody in place and then hand them their puppets. So that was a nightmare, because there's nothing for them to stand on. It's a big hole in the ground. They have to make their way around and hand puppets off. Everybody gets settled. And then when the camera moved out, I think as camera pulls back out the door, I think those puppeteers had a little bit more space, and they probably kind of folded in front of the camera. They stepped into place a little bit. You know, it's kind of a camera trick you can do that as camera moves back, that you can kind of move into the shot. And it looks like the camera just passed. If you do it at the right speed, it doesn't look like it moved, the character moved in. It looks like it just went past it. You know, you can kind of work with the movement of the camera. That was a hard one. I was going to say about Rizzo, Weldon, this character I'm doing now, is like almost like an extension of Rizzo in a way. It's that New York kind of accent. You know, Weldon's kind of more down here, but he's very grouchy, and he's like Rizzo on steroids. You know, that kind of thing. You know.
A little
Anyway.
beefed up there.
Yeah. When Weldon answers the phone, he doesn't say hello. He says, "What do you want?" You know, he's always, you know. Anyway, well.
Awesome. Awesome thing. And those right
I
behind
know
you,
I saw
Amanda?
somebody on this side. Where was it?
There
you
you go.
are. Okay.
Don't worry, I've got you two up front.
So
then back to
obviously
you.
Kermit holds a very special spot in your heart, but what would you say is one of your favorite random, maybe more obscure Muppets that you've ever worked with or watched someone else work with?
Obscure, that's interesting. There was a Fraggle on Fraggle Rock named Marlon Fraggle, who was this guy was sick. He was seriously had a problem. One eye was bigger than the other, and if you ever see this character, I can't tell you what episode he was on. His voice is pretty much the same voice as the Skeksis scientist.
He was like this, you know, he talked like this.
He was a weird one, and Dave Goelz and I had so much fun. I think Dave did a character along with him. I can't recall. Dave and I did so many characters together. But Marlon Fraggle was very obscure, and I had a lot of fun with him because he was really a departure from a character like Wembley. But probably my favorite character of all time to do was Rizzo, and my favorite project was probably Fraggle Rock.
I love
That time frame in that show was just really special. I've been with the Muppets about 5 years. I was really just starting to get on my feet doing characters and kind of knowing what I was doing. And then, Wembley and Sprocket came along, so that was incredible fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so up here in the front? We're going to get some here, and we're going to come back to the middle and start coming back around.
Thank you. Okay, so this might be a little broad, but what exactly was the set in Fraggle Rock made out of? And I'll make it less broad. Were the rocks squishy? I've always wondered this.
No, that's a good question. They were styrofoam. Everything was carved blocks of styrofoam, so they were quite lightweight. And they might have had a little bit of, I don't know whether it was just paint, like a hard enamel-y sort of paint, or whether it was maybe a touch of plaster. But I want to say it was just paint, because it's that beaded styrofoam.
Yeah.
And you get it, it's this fidgety habit. We'd all sit there and start picking at the set, Eventually, we'd have a big hole in the set, and the guys would say, "Stop! You gotta stop doing that." But the best thing about that set was, because we always would read our scripts as we were working, you could take a T-pin and you could pin your script to the set. So if you had to walk like from here to there in a shot, like a big long move, you don't remember the line at the end, so you've got it posted down here. When you arrive, there's your paper, just pinned on the set.
Okay, while we're on the topic,
Yeah.
I'm a little embarrassed to ask, but can you do Wembley?
I can try. My throat's in terrible shape.
Well, Wembley is sort of in the same range as Rizzo. It's sort of the same voice, but I have to be careful not to put the accent in.
I'm not doing that very well right now.
No,
I've been
you
talking.
totally are. I might cry.
Is it
I
okay?
saw people cry. I think you nailed it.
I may cry. Is that because it's good or because it was terrible?
Because it's
You're crying?
awesome.
No one tell him.
That was awful. Oh, God, he's so terrible. Wembley was a very selective voice at a certain point in my career. My voice was a little different, and it's a little bit hard for me to do now if I've been standing on the floor talking loud all day. I'd love to have done Wembley for this new thing.
Yeah.
It would have been great to bring him back.
This is the nature. So there was one over here, and then we're going to come over this way, I believe. Or we got everyone over here? Oh, you already had the microphone. Awesome, cool.
Oh, yeah. It's really great to meet you. Yeah, I was wondering, what was it like doing Kermit's Swamp Years?
Swamp Years, that was an
Swamp Years.
interesting one.
Wow.
Suddenly we were doing Kermit as a adolescent. So they built this Kermit puppet that had a little bit bigger head. His head was a little enlarged. And we thought, well, there was one moment where people thought, should we do the voices? But then we knew we kind of should. And so I don't remember what I did with his voice, but I made it a little bit higher, which was not easy because his voice is already quite high. And I might have added this tiny little bit of a lisp or a tongue thing in there. But mostly he was Kermit.
Yeah.
I love that show. We shot that show all around Disney in Orlando, back when there was more of a functioning studio there. Like out in a real swamp.
In actual swamps, yeah.
Some of it.
Back when there was actual swamp. Wait, hold on.
Some of it, yeah. That was fun. It was a great fun thing.
Nice.
All my friends from Atlanta came down to visit,
Just, hey, since you're in Disney, do you mind if we...
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, we've got a question here, and we got some here as well. So, so 1, 2, 3, yeah.
Hi, so I've been to several Muppet panels and read interviews and stuff, and everyone always talked about, back in the day, how things were so fun filming together.
Yeah.
In your memory, is there a project that, if you could go back and relive that and re-experience those moments, which project would it be?
Well, I hate to repeat myself. Fraggle is a lot of that. But the only thing about Fraggle was, Jim sort of was not there very much. And Frank wasn't there at all. And we loved working with both of them. All of us did. It was almost like Jim said he was going to go off and kind of start developing things like the Dark Crystal or Labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to set you guys up and leave you to do a show, because he trusted us to do it. And I think we all grew as performers during that time, because we were left to make a lot of our own decisions. It's funny I say that, because Jim never told us what to do anyway. He would set the broad framework. He never told us how to play a scene. It was up to us. Within the context of whatever he was visualizing as the scene. But still, there was something about all of a sudden we were on our own. The master was gone. We had to make it work.
Yeah.
That was kind of cool. But with Jim, my favorite thing to do was Rolf's hands on the piano. Even in later years when I was doing characters, whenever Jim would do Rolf playing the piano, I always tried to make sure I was there to do it, because I'm a bad piano player, but Rolf, we had these pre-recorded piano tracks, which are great, and I knew where the notes were, and I could make them look super accurate, Love that. Thank you. Yeah, sure.
That's excellent. right, so we're going to come back to y'all because I've been trying to get to her for a little bit with the classes, and then we'll come to the front. Yes, yes. Are you still good? Okay, yeah. And then we'll come back up here in the front, Amanda.
Hello.
Hey.
You kind of touched on this a little earlier, but what was it like to kind of take over doing Kermit after like all of that? Like, what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was hard. One of the things we talked about earlier is that we didn't know Jim was going to die. I mean, it was very, very sudden. And, you know, we had never talked about, no one had ever talked about passing the characters on because it didn't seem like an imminent thing, you know. It wasn't what people were thinking about. We were thinking about the next thing we're going to do. So there was no plan in place, except that evidently Jim had said to Jane Henson, his wife, and I think maybe to Frank Oz, never said it to me, that because he was trying to sell his company to Disney at that point in 1990, he was going to come in as a big creative force, much like John Lasseter did with Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought he might be too busy to continue to be a performer. So apparently he had said to them, you know, if that happens, I'm thinking about asking Steve to take over Kermit. So, but he never said it to me. So all of a sudden, you know, he's sick and we lose him, and they come to me, and Jane said, well, he essentially had already chosen you to do this. So the first thing was to try it and see if I felt comfortable doing it. I immediately said I would, and then I was petrified, you know. They sent me a Kermit puppet to my house here in Atlanta, and, you know, I've been around Kermit. I mean, I had the puppet on once or twice. You know, I did my own characters. I've been doing this for a long time at that point. And I put Kermit on. I was standing in front of a mirror, like at the dresser mirror in my bedroom, you know. And I knew how to make the puppet work, and I kind of knew how Jim had done many of the expressions and the hand moves to a limited degree. And then this puppet looked at me, and it was almost like the puppet was saying, okay, time to do the voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I freaked out. It was like, oh my God. I took the puppet off, put the puppet in like another room, and didn't touch it for a week.
It was haunting.
I couldn't go near it. This was right after Jim had died.
Yeah.
The puppet smelled like Jim. It was the weirdest thing. And I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be really hard. And finally, somebody like Brian called and said, how's it going? Weeks. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's okay. You know? He said, we kind of need to see something.
Yeah.
You know, because they're planning Christmas Carol or something, right?
Right.
And so I did this little recording of me doing, I think It's Not That Easy Being Green.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the voice was probably pretty terrible. And, you know, it was, my voice was never Jim's voice, really. It was never the same. But what was always, I just had this inclination that the most important thing was the character, and that the voice would come separate. And honestly, I got that piece of advice once from Jim. When we did the Bunny Picnic, the show with this character named Bean Bunny. So by now I'd done Rizzo and Wembley, and they all had this voice in this range. It was easy. It's an easy voice for me. Little differences, but very similar. And suddenly Bean, we do a read-through, and just as a default in the read-through, I did that voice, and Jim said, that's great, like that. And then I started trying to change it, because I was frustrated that I kept doing the same voice all the time. I thought, I got to change this up. And I was walking across the soundstage with Jim, and he's here, you know, and I said, I don't know, Jim, I would like to do something different with that voice. He said, the voice you're doing is great. And I said, yeah, but it's the same one. I'm doing the same thing every time, you know. And he said, he kind of, you know, he would do this thing sometimes when he thought he would kind of put this finger in his mouth. He's a very thoughtful guy like that. And he would said, at the time, Burt Reynolds was really popular, like Cannonball Run, the actor Burt Reynolds. And he said, well, you know, whenever Burt Reynolds does a film, he always uses the same voice. Which is true. He's an actor. He always uses it.
Yeah.
And I thought, by golly, you're right. And we both laughed. And he didn't care. He didn't care.
Yeah.
It was about the character. It wasn't about the voice. And I took that into Kermit a little bit. And once I was comfortable with essentially kind of performing Jim in a funny sort of way, because the things I knew about him, when I was doing Kermit, you know, I've got this visual, I got the character there, and once I was thinking Jim and thinking about the expressions he had on his face and the way he did it, it started to come much more naturally. And at that point, because that began to feel comfortable, I was able to, we talked about evolution, I was able to start to evolve it a little bit. But it was always based on what I knew of Jim. And I as I said, I know I never would have been able to do it if I didn't have that basis.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So we've got time for maybe one, maybe two, depending on how long Steve goes. And I
Okay.
know we've been trying to get to y'all up here
Okay.
for a while. So come on, we'll try to go down this line as quick as we can.
Hi,
hello.
this is a question that has been plaguing me for a very long time.
Oh my goodness,
Um,
I hope I can help.
I think
No
you
pressure.
can. We have not been able to figure out how Wembley's moving eyes function.
Well, yeah.
We've tried to look up like different like talks and stuff about like some of the different eye mechanics that have been used in,
Yeah.
in Muppets and stuff. But Wembley's, we've not been able to
Yeah.
figure out.
Well, it's actually really simple. That puppet's head was a special head. There's a normal head, eyes that didn't move. This one had the two round circles, spheres, and they were mounted in these little sockets, and each of those sockets had a motor on it, a little servo. And I had a button on the arm rod down at the bottom of the rod, and when I pushed that button, I think it was either a rocker thing. Anyway, it was really awkward. I think it was a button, because it was too hard to do this. His eyes would spin around, and so the pupils being placed where they were meant that they spent way up on top of his head from the angle that the circle turned, from that the ball turned. And then the only thing was that it always returned back to its default spot. So if I held the button down, it stayed where I put it. It would do a full revolution. Otherwise, it would go around and it would go back. So I didn't use it very much. Only once in a while for special things, like if he was looking around a corner, I'd have him go and his eyes would turn, not his head. But I felt early on I should save it for really when it made sense and not overuse it, because then it's just this eyes going back and forth all the time, But that's what it was. It was this clever little thing with just two little motors going right in the bottom like a globe. And because of the angle, they turned a certain way.
Because we've seen the ones on like the sticks and stuff like that.
What's that?
We've seen ones on like sticks.
Yeah.
And we were thinking like that
Well,
kind of
there would be
thing.
ways to do it manually. I don't know how you could do it with your hand in there. But these little motors is the way it was done.
Motors. Why
Now
didn't we
the
think of
insides,
that?
I don't know. I don't know what the insides were like. I never looked inside of there.
Sure, sure.
Inside of there. We had an incredible team of people at that point. Foz Fazakas, this guy had been with Jim forever. Tom Newby, Fred Buckholz, this whole Larry Jameson. These four guys with others built all these things like the doozers. Some of the doozers were radio controlled in early days of radio control.
Oh, wow.
The Gorg's eyes were radio controlled. And you ran them off of these things like, airplane control, model airplanes. And a taxi would go by the studio and they would go crazy and the eyes would start to jump around, It was weird stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so we are actually at time.
We have time for one last
But
question.
if we are good with, can we just drive through this one last question?
Of course, I'm fine.
And because we do have the schedule to keep.
sorry we
but
can't
also,
get
but also,
everybody.
Steve, you will be at your table as well. So please.
Well, also, come back tomorrow. We're doing this again. You'll hear all the same things, but you can ask another question.
And actually, Amanda here will be moderating that tomorrow.
Oh,
so
perfect,
yeah,
Amanda.
please,
Good,
let's
good,
go
good.
do this last question, and,
Yes.
and let's get going.
And also thank you for running around everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm glad that my dear friend back here asked the question because I was curious, how do you when you're approached with creating a brand new character, what's your process for creating them?
And I'm not even sure what that process would have been before. It used to be that, I didn't build puppets with the Muppets. So I would usually work with whoever's in the workshop building the character and whoever designed it. We would talk about the insides. Because it's very important. Sometimes there are beautiful puppets that you put your hand in and it's impossible. So it was nice to be a part of that process where they would sometimes send them to me for fittings and things like that, or I'd go to New York and work with them. And I would, oftentimes if they had a particular feature, like a big jaw, like Weldon's got this big jaw. I don't do it very much now, but I started thinking, well, do I do that with my jaw when I talk for him, and it's too much. But think about that, do they look uncomfortable? I had this big polar bear I did on a show called The Animal Show who was massive and heavy. And so I just played that. And he didn't move like a zany puppet. It was hard for him to turn around, he had this big thing, I try to build those things in. And then, of course, you work with the writers and producers, whoever's conceiving the show. With Weldon, I built the puppet. First puppet I built in 35 years. I got lucky because it could have really been bad. I got lucky. He turned out good. And as I was building the puppet, I found myself, I'm like building his eye mechanism and starting to think about gluing and cutting out, drawing patterns, and I'm starting to do the voice and thinking about it kind of from the inside out, you know, sort of thing. So that, I guess that's my process if I'm building the puppet, you know. Same in the way, because I worked with the builders too, but,
So,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that question.
Yeah, it's a
And-
good question.
And everyone, that is all we have for our hour, so please give a round of applause
Thank
to
you, guys.
our friend Steve. Catch him at his table later. He's got Cave-In streaming tonight on YouTube. Catch his show Cave-In tonight, and also a
Yeah.
panel tomorrow that our friend Amanda will be joining with.
Yes,
So thank you all,
yes.
and enjoy the
Thank
rest
you,
of your time at
guys.
MomoCon.
Thank you very much.